Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third and last of the Omnibus Lecture Series for this semester. And an exciting lecture, I think it's going to be. Tonight we have an internationally known author. In fact, he was regaling us with stories of his awards in Amsterdam, where they have a great conference for thriller authors. He was put in a box, and the box was blown up around him. So it's got to be exciting it's got to be thrilling to be a thriller author. Once again, I want to remind you that we are very grateful to the English Bonner Mitchell Foundation. The foundation has been loyal to this series for many years now, and we could not do it without them. And I think it's been a wonderful way of bringing together IPFW in the community, and we're delighted to have you all here tonight as a result. Our media sponsors tonight are Wayne TV, News Channel 15, and of course Northeast Indiana Public Radio, and we're grateful to them as well. But most important is the collaboration for tonight's lecture that we have with United Way of Allen County. And you will hear in just a few minutes the new initiative that United Way of Allen County is proposing. That new initiative fits in very well with Mr. Baldacci's interests, and we're very excited to be partners in that process with them. At the conclusion of tonight's lecture, of course, we'll have the usual question and answer session that got fairly exciting last time. I guess that it was the lecture that was more exciting, not the question and answer session. Let's try not to make it quite as exciting this time. Please ask your questions as questions, and try not to make statements that are too long. Although I'm trying to imagine opinions about thriller novels that could parallel the opinions about our political scene. But in any event, afterwards, Mr. Baldacci will be available in the lobby for a book signing, and we will look forward to interacting with them then, and you can do it on an individual basis. Tonight, Jerry Peterson from United Way will introduce Mr. Baldacci, and will talk to you about this exciting new initiative that United Way is beginning. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Dr. Wortell. We're very proud to help sponsor an event this evening that is really about a celebration of literacy and reading. All of us here tonight know the joy, the true joy that we get from being able to read books by authors like David Baldacci. But we have to acknowledge tonight that there are many people in our community who are unable to read those books. And it is because of that, and in the constant search that United Way is in to find solutions to poverty, that we have come to a real commitment at United Way to say that it is literacy and reading that is one of the true keys to solving the problems of poverty in our community. United Way wants everyone in our community to be able to enjoy that true joy of reading, and so it's for that reason that tonight, at this very place and moment, I invite you to help us launch a very exciting initiative that has been in the works for several years at United Way. The initiative is entitled Learn United. And with the Learn United language, we are challenging the community to come together in a united way to promote literacy, that we would come together and be united in changing some startling statistics about our community. Did you know that every single year there are more than 1,000 third graders in our public schools who do not pass the language portion of the I-STEP exam? That's more than 1,000 third graders every year who cannot read at grade level, and 74% of those children will never catch up. It means that later on in life they will struggle to find jobs that support their families and to be able to read and enjoy the beauty of this life that we have been given. Most of the children who are unable to read are in homes where their parents or a single parent struggles to be able to provide enough income for the family just to meet their most basic needs. So Learn United is all about changing those numbers. It's about making sure that we come together as a community so that ultimately every single one of our third graders will be reading at grade level by the end of third grade. The United Way Board has made a 10-year commitment to this effort, and we're very excited about a myriad of partners who are coming together across the community. The first ones and most important are Fort Wayne Community Schools, East Allen County Schools, and Allen County Education Partnership. The primary goal, the most public goal of this initiative, is to connect community volunteers with struggling readers in the school systems. And so tonight, we are asking you, all of you, if possible, to consider joining together to volunteer to help those struggling readers. And in your programs, there is a card, a response card, and we ask you to take those out of your programs. If you check that off and mail it in or leave it when you leave the auditorium tonight, you're not making any commitments. You're simply telling us you would like some more information as we move forward with this. And so we're asking you to do your part as a community, because together we can, in fact, make sure that all of our third graders are reading at the end of third grade and that they have a bright future ahead of them. And now, I know we'd all like the opportunity to hear from someone who also champions literacy, David Baldacci. In addition to writing numerous bestsellers, Dr. Baldacci is a fantastic advocate for literacy. He has even created his own foundation in support of literacy, the Wish You Well Foundation. Mr. Baldacci is a former Washington, D.C. trial and corporate lawyer, a career that gave him plenty of background for the political and legal thrillers that he's written. And he's here tonight to discuss From Thriller to Tradition, balancing between deadly suspense and wistful Southern fiction. Please help me welcome David Baldacci.
Thank you. You know, it's amazing. You go out on book tour and you become a doctor. I like that. I should get out more often. Well, I wanted to thank the university for having me, and certainly it's great to be part of the United Way effort tonight. Certainly literacy is near and dear to my heart, and I'll be talking a little bit later in my remarks about my connection with literacy and what we're trying to do in our own small way to further those goals in the United States. I'm in the middle of a book tour right now with Divine Justice. I found out yesterday Divine Justice was #1 selling book in America the first week out, so that was really good news. Even better news, my mom didn't have to buy all the copies this time. It's just great. It was getting to be quite a burden on her. So I'm in the middle of a book tour right now. It's taking me sort of north and west and south and then back home to my home in Northern Virginia, and about the middle of the tour. But it's always great to go out and talk to people and readers and fans and just see that there are a lot of people across the United States who love books and love writers. I get a lot of questions from fans when I'm out. And I get a lot of people coming up to me and more telling me this statement. You know, Mr. Baldacci, it seems like there are a lot of lawyers writing fiction these days. And I look at them and I say, you know, some of the best fiction I ever wrote was when I was a lawyer. And I really mean that. Now, the other question I get more than any other is, Mr. Baldacci, what is it like to be a #1 best-selling novelist whose books are translated in all these languages and read all over the world? And I know the way they ask the question, they expect some glamorous, glitzy answer, like I get up at noon every day, and I put on my favorite smoking jacket, and I have a fuzzy little dog that I carry under my arm, and I go down to my study where I have a bevy of people waiting to write down my every utterance. Well, my life is not like that, so instead of that, in answer to that question, what is it like to be a #1 best-selling novelist, I tell them a true story about my kids. Now, my kids are in high school now, but when they were younger, when they were little kids, if you asked my daughter what her dad did for a living, she would not say that her dad wrote books for a living. She would automatically say, "My dad signs books." That's all he does. And for some reason, people pay him. I don't understand it. My daughter, I think, was the only kid in kindergarten class who asked her dad not to come to Parents' Career Day. And I asked her about that later, and she said, "Dad, I thought you get in trouble because if you write in the library books, you get a detention." So. Now, she must have passed his wisdom on to her little brother. The first time I took my son to a bookstore, he was about 3 years old. We walked into the bookstore. He saw all the books, all the people reading. His eyes got really big, and all of a sudden my kid took off across that bookstore, running as fast as he could, screaming at the top of his lungs, "My daddy will sign any book you've got for $2. So that's what it's like to be a #1 best-selling novelist. I don't go to kindergarten career day, and I get $2 per book for writing my name in a book that I didn't necessarily write. You'll be glad to know that I've waived my signing fee for tonight, and I sign your book for free. I started out as a short story writer. When I was a little kid, I used to tell these whopper tales all the time. And I guess I did it mostly to get myself out of trouble with parents and assorted school officials. And my mom got tired of it finally. She went to a bookstore and she bought a blank page book and brought it home and said, "Start writing some of this stuff down." And I think she did it just to shut me up, but I started writing it down, and I've never stopped. You know, I'm a writer today because I was a reader as a kid, and that's why programs like the United Way are so critically important. If I were not a reader as a kid, I would not be standing before you today having written so many novels, because I really wouldn't have written anything. Books were that important in my life. Now, I started writing short stories when I was in middle school and high school, and when I was in college. And I sent them out to magazines and periodicals you probably never even heard of. The New Yorker. Another rag was Atlantic Monthly, I think. And I got a lot of rejections back. I mean, dozens and dozens of rejections over the years. And I found out one thing: no matter where you sent your short story to, no matter what magazine or periodical, you got the same pre-printed card back. I think they used the same printing shop in a little town in New Jersey. And you got this card back that no human hand had touched. And it said something like this: "We hope this finds a place somewhere," talking about the story that I'd written with my blood and my sweat and my tears. And it went on to say, "Rest assured, that place will never be here." So with all that encouragement, I just kept going forward. Now, what is a rejection? I've always considered a rejection, at least as a writer, a badge of honor. Because if you're rejected as a writer, it shows you're doing two things. One, you're actually writing something and finishing it. For those of you who have attempted it or done it, it's not that easy to do. And you've taken this very personal thing that you've created and sent it out to a complete stranger, probably with the result being if they even contact you back, it's not going to be good news. So a rejection is only really a negative thing if it dissuades you from following something you're passionate about, regardless of whether it's writing or something else, some other endeavor. That's the only way a rejection can really hurt you. And let me tell you, passion is very rare these days. And if you have it in your life, be very loath to give it up, because if you do, it may never come back again. So that's the only time rejection hurts you. Keep moving forward if you have passion about something. Now, I went from short story writing to screenplay writing. And I was a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and a friend of mine who went out to Los Angeles to break into film as a producer. He was out there for a few years. He was not successful, and he came back and he brought with him what was then an unproduced screenplay, and he asked me to read it and give him my opinion. I read it, and my opinion was clear. I mean, it was just garbage. I'm sure that shocks you about a Hollywood screenplay, that it could actually be bad, but this one was really bad. It wasn't even a story. It was like a series of disjointed vignettes, and the potty humor was all stupid, and there was no character development. And I was convinced no one would make a movie out of this drivel. You know, Austin Powers went on to become an enormous hit. Really big. I'm sure nobody here went to see it, but apparently millions of your fellow citizens did, and they liked it a lot. So although I clearly had no sophistication or talent for reading screenplays, because I had missed all the subtle nuances and brilliance of the Austin Powers franchise, but nevertheless, I spent 4 or 5 years writing screenplays while I was practicing law in Washington. It was a different medium for me. It was a different way to tell a story. Instead of it being on a printed page, it was going to be on a big screen in a theater. And it was a very technical way to tell a story, and it was very challenging. And I finally got a screenplay agent in Los Angeles based on my screenplays, and let me tell you, that's very difficult to do when you don't live there, because my first meeting out in Los Angeles with a very young producer, he looked like he was about 11 years old, ran a major production company, and he said, "So where are you coming from?" And I said, I'm coming from Virginia. And he looked at me and he said, "What's that?" Not, "Where's that?" "What's that?" And I thought he was kidding. I said, "It's a state." He said, "A state of what?" And I said, "It's a state of the United States." And he said, whatever. Now, I'm a native Virginian. I'm proud of where I come from, as I'm sure you are. So I said, there are actually 2 Virginias. And the kid looked at me and said, "No way." And I said, "Yeah, there's a Virginia and there's a West Virginia." Well, he said, "Isn't that confusing to people?" I said, "No, West Virginia is actually in Canada." And he was like, "Oh, I get it. Oh, that makes sense." So anyway, I had an agent in Los Angeles, and my career was starting to take off. People were noticing the screenplays, and I had some option. And I thought, I'll be a lawyer by day, and maybe I'll sell a screenplay, and somebody will make it into a movie, and that would be a nice sort of side career that I would have. Well, about the time that started to take off in my life, I'd finished my very first novel, Absolute Power. For those of you who have read the book or seen the movie, upon which it was hardly based at all, here's the sort of the synopsis of the novel. In Absolute Power, the President of the United States is not a really nice person. He has affairs with other women. During one of these trysts, something really bad happens. There has to be a cover-up. Eventually, the truth does come out. At the end of the novel, he's impeached by the United States Congress. Now, I have to tell you, when I wrote that story, it was entirely original. I wrote Absolute Power when George Bush I was president. It's not based on him. It's not based on any president you might be thinking about right now. It was just sort of a cool story that I had developed when I was working in Washington. I worked very close to the White House. I'd see the president come and go with the motorcade. And I thought about, wouldn't it be original to have a novel where you sort of flipped all the stereotypes? You made all the good, traditionally the good people not so good, and you made the person with the highest moral fiber in the entire novel a burglar who stole from people. And I thought it was an original story, and it really catapulted me into sort of this international bestsellerdom. And I was an internationally best-selling thriller writer when really I'd only started out wanting to be a short story writer many years ago in Virginia because I was just enthralled with reading books. I wanted to create stories that would mesmerize people the same way that I was enthralled when I would read books by my favorite authors. So Absolute Power came along, and I've written 15 best-selling novels since then, and it's been a terrific ride. And writing is what I've always wanted to do in my life. I never thought I'd have an opportunity to do it full-time. I thought I'd be a lawyer to support the family, and I would write on the side. I feel like I'm very blessed to be able to do what I truly love to do for a living, because I've certainly been on the other side where it's not like I got out of bed every morning and said, thank you, God, for giving me another day to sue and destroy people. That really never got me going, but now I'm doing, I think, what I need to be doing. Now, it's interesting, when you've written as many novels as I've written, and you travel as widely as I do, both in this country and overseas, a certain phenomena occurs. I'm rarely out in public where I don't see someone reading one of my novels. On a plane, you go up the aisle to go to the restroom, and there's somebody reading a book. On a train, by the pool, at a hotel. I have one rule about that. If I ever see you reading one of my novels in public, I will never come up to you. For two reasons. First, I'm actually a pretty reserved, private person, and I certainly would never want to invade someone else's privacy. And secondly, and far more importantly, if you're not enjoying the novel, I don't want to hear about it. That's in the category of life being too short. That's what Amazon.com review boards are for, by the way. You can go on Amazon and anonymously trash any writer that you want. I went on there a few years ago and I read a review by a woman who gave me 1 star out of 5, which is the lowest that Amazon allows. And she was lamenting the fact that Amazon did not allow for 0 stars, because that undoubtedly would have been my fate had they. And she said, my problem with this book is I figured it out in the last 3 pages and therefore found it predictable. Apparently the preceding 487 pages didn't really rock her boat. But ever since then, I've written my novels in a different way, such that the actual resolutions for the story do not occur in the book itself. Have you noticed that lately? You have to look on the back of the Just Jacket flap. There's a 1-800 number for you to call. It's a free call, by the way, but you have to make the call if you actually want the ending of the novel, so I won't be deemed predictable. Anyway, so my rule is, if you're in public reading one of my books, I'll never come up to you. Well, about 4 years ago, I was on a book tour. I flew into LAX really late at night. I had a very busy day the next morning. I just wanted to go, grab my bags, go to my hotel and crash, and then start the new day. As I'm walking towards baggage claim, I see this guy standing in the middle of the aisle with his luggage strewn all around him, and he's just standing there reading a book. And my first reaction was, this poor guy has no life. I mean, it's midnight at LAX, he's by himself, he's standing, he's not even sitting, and he's reading a book. My second reaction was one of curiosity. I have a lot of writers who are friends, and I'm a writer, so I thought, what is this guy reading? As I walked by and looked back, I saw he was reading a copy of Absolute Power. Then my dilemma was sort of obvious. I remember so vividly just sort of vacillating back and forth. Should I? I've got this rule. Shouldn't I? I've really got this rule. Finally, I decided, he looks okay. I walked over to him and I said, boy, it looks like you're really enjoying that book. He said, oh, yeah, it's great. It's a page turner. I'm really enjoying it. I said, well, I'm really happy to hear that, actually. Would you like me to sign it for you? And then the book came down a little bit, so I could see his beady little eyes. And this guy looks me up and down in a really unflattering way, and he said, no. I don't want you to write your name in my book. I took a step back. I felt like a fool. I said, sir, I'm so sorry. I actually have this rule about not doing what I just did. But I saw you reading the book. You said you'd enjoyed it. So I just thought you'd like it autographed, because I wrote it. So he looks me up and down again, and he said, no, you didn't. I took another step back. I'm really trying to keep this light and upbeat. And I said, ironically enough, Absolute Power was my very first novel. I am David Baldacci. So then the guy points a finger at me. I won't tell you which one. And he says, look, freak, get away from me. You're not David Baldacci. Man, I could only assume this happens a lot at LAX, I know it's a strange place. You got a white-haired guy walking around going, I'm Mark Twain, I'm dead. But I saw you reading Huckleberry over there, and... Well, by this time, a small crowd had gathered around us, I guess, waiting for us to start punching each other out. I'm a nice guy. I'm a really calm guy. It takes a lot to get me upset. But this man had pushed all my buttons way past maximum. So I said, "Excuse me." So I reached up and I ripped the book out of the guy's hand. I flipped it around where there was a big picture of me on the back. I held it up to my face and I said, "Do you see, buckaroo?" I am David Baldacci. He looks at the picture, he looks at me, he gets a really sheepish expression on his face. He slowly reaches in his pocket and pulls out a pen. He's kind of looking down at his shoes, he's chuckling. And he said, "Mr. Baldacci, what an honor." "Would you sign my book for me, sir, please?" So I looked at him, I chuckled too. What else could you do? I slapped him on the back as hard as I possibly could. And I said, "No." But I did, I signed his book. But trust me, if you are ever out in public reading one of my novels and you see me, you'll never be able to catch me. My books have been translated into over 40 foreign languages. I have 40 different publishers. And in all those languages and in all those countries, the name on the book is David Baldacci, except for one language, one country where I was forced to adopt a pseudonym. Before Absolute Power was published anywhere, I got a call from my agent in New York, and he said, "I've got Mondadori. They're the largest publisher in Italy. And they're very excited about Absolute Power and its prospects in Italy, but they have a little problem with the name." Now, I thought he was talking about the title of the book, Absolute Power. And I said, well, if they have a problem with the title, they could change it. Other countries have done that. For instance, in Germany, if you travel to Germany and you look for a copy of Absolute Power, you will not be able to find it, because in Germany the title is Der Präsident. Well, my agent said, no, they love the title. The problem they have is with your name. Now, for those of you who thought that maybe Baldacci was, I don't know, Irish, it's not. I'm Italian-American. So I said to my agent, I said, the Italian publisher has a problem with my Italian name? And he said, "Oh, yeah, it's a big problem, actually." I said, "Well, how could that be? I mean, you know, the Latvians love me, the Germans, the Koreans, the Swiss, the Danes, they all love me as David Baldacci. Why do the Italians have a problem?" He said, "Well, it's a well-known fact that other Italians don't think that Italians can write." And I just thought about that for a second, and I said, well, you know, Dante, Machiavelli, and Puzo had pretty good careers, didn't they? He said, well, the problem is, just like American film, people want American thriller writers. And if they see Baldacci on the cover, they're going to assume you're an Italian, not an Italian-American, and you're a second-tier thriller writer, and they're not going to buy your book. And this was a big blow to me, because I was very proud of the fact that I was going to have my first novel published in the land of my ancestors. And I think that my agent could tell that I was a little upset, because I asked him, what sort of a name do they want? And he said, well, they'd like an American name. I said, do they understand that we're a country of immigrants? We are all from somewhere else. He said, look, why don't you just think about it and call me back later? I said, no, if you had them in your office right now, you give me 5 seconds. I'll come up with the greatest American name you've ever heard. He said, oh, okay. So I remember putting the phone down, and I thought to myself, oh my God, what do I do now? Well, luckily I looked out the window, and back then we owned an Explorer. I saw the big blue emblem. I picked the phone up and said, I want to be called David Ford. And right away my agent said, that sounds American. He's really fast, my agent, you know. He's like, boom, he's got it. He said, let me try it out in the Italian. So I hear him telling the Italians he wants to be called David Ford. Now, the next word I hear is from the chairman of Mondadori, who screams out the word so loudly that I can hear him even though he's not holding the phone. And the word he screamed out is, genius! You know, Italians are very passionate people, by the way. So my agent gets back on the phone and he said, my gosh, David, they love it. It's perfect. David Ford. It's brilliant. How did you think of that so fast? And I said, hey, never forget one thing. I'm a writer. And this stuff oozes off of me 24/7. So David Ford, #1 best-selling novelist in Italy. My second novel they sent me, I was David, middle initial B, Ford. Why? I don't know. My third novel, I was David Baldacci Ford. I had to make the book a little wider to accommodate the names. In my next novel, I was David Baldacci, and the Ford is now gone from my name. Now, the chairman of Mondadori, and I know this sounds apocryphal, but it actually is true, the chairman of Mondadori, the guy who yelled out the word genius, his name is Gianni Ferrari. And when I do a book tour in Italy, we're always introduced as Ford and Ferrari. Very nice. You never know. Now, I went back to Italy this summer with my family and some friends, and I got an email from the mayor of Barga. And Barga is a little walled city about 60 kilometers north of Lucca. It's actually near Pisa as well, on the northwest side of Italy. And it's very special for me because it's where my grandfather was born and grew up. Now, my grandfather passed away before I was born, so I never knew him, but I've always wanted to go to that village. And the mayor of Barga emailed me, and he said, I'd read in an Italian magazine that your family is vacationing in Italy this year, and we would love to have you come to Barga so that I could take you to lunch. I said, that's great, because I was planning on coming anyway. So off we go in 2 cars, and we drove like 2.5 hours with 10 people, including my kids. And we're dressed very casually because it's in the middle of August in Italy, and we had shorts and polo shirts on. And we're driving and driving. We're trying to find the place, and it's getting close to the time we're supposed to be having the lunch. And we pull up, and I'm looking around, and I looked at my wife, and I said, do you think we're in the right place? And she looked out the window, and she said, well, given the fact there's a 14-foot tall poster of you on that wall, I think we're probably in the right place. And she said, the other indicator was that marching band over there. I said, yeah, that seems to be right then. So we pulled in, and it was like David Baldacci Day in Barga. They have not flown the American flag in Barga since 1945. They flew the American flag in Barga that day for me. And they had my pictures everywhere. They had 60 Baldaccis who I'd never met before in my life come out. I had to give this grand speech in the middle courtyard with 8,000 Bargians watching and listening. They gave me the St. Christopher's Medal, which is their patron saint. They gave me a genealogical chart which listed all of my ancestors in Barga back to 1300. They gave me a map of Italy. They gave me the flag of Italy. They gave me, I was made an honorary citizen of Barga with the condition that I voted for the current mayor each time that I was there. But one of the most special things they gave me was a journal that was started by my ancestor Pietro Baldacci in 1635 out of the town archives, and he had handed it down to his descendants over the years, and the last entry in it was in 1850, and they gave that to me as a present. It was a beautiful book, full of script, and beautiful Italian script, and it was just a terrific day. As you can well imagine, we weren't there simply for lunch. We were there for the whole day, and it was really one for the memory books. And it was great to be able to walk the same streets that my grandfather had walked when he was a young man full of ambition with the idea of coming to America to make a better life for himself. Now, if you've read my novels, I hope you can appreciate the fact that I do a lot of research for each of them. And the key about research is, as a fiction writer, you leave most of it out. Because the problem with some writers, everybody here has read a flip book. I know you probably don't know what I'm talking about. Everybody here has read at least one flip book in your life. A flip book is where a writer has done a lot of research. They're very proud of it. They really don't want to leave anything out, but they don't want to take the time to integrate it into the novel itself, so they just pick a spot and they just dump it all in one area. And you, the reader, are reading along, enjoying the story, and all of a sudden you bump into the research. And you're like, oh my God, flip, 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 flip. Oh, there's the story again. All right. So it's very important to take the time to integrate it and to leave 95% of it out, because I'm not writing a textbook. I'm trying to do something that will entertain you, but hopefully will inform you. But sometimes the best way to inform is to be concise and economical. The more you put in, the more you dilute what you're trying to say. So I take my research very seriously, and sometimes research can get you into dicey situations. I've done a lot of things. I've traveled the world researching my novels, going to places that my characters go to. I learned to ride a horse. I learned to fire every weapon you could possibly fire, including pistols and semi-automatic pistols and shotguns and machine guns. I'm not a huge gun aficionado, but it does allow you to write about it a lot more vividly when you've actually done it for yourself than just having it described to you by a third person. Well, a few years ago, I was down at the Secret Service's Washington field office. The Secret Service has been very accommodating to me over the years. A lot of the agents there read my novels, appreciate the fact that I'm trying to get it as accurate as possible, so I built a lot of good relationships there. And I'm at the field office, and they're showing me through the place and letting me talk to all these different people, and really added a lot of great research that I think made the book immeasurably better. And as we were waiting at the elevator to go down to another floor, I'm with a group of agents. Another agent walks by, and he's got his gun and his badge on his belt. And all of a sudden, this guy whips around, and he points at me, and he yells out, "Hey, you!" I don't like men with guns yelling at me. So I turned, and I said, "Is there a problem?" And he said, "Are you David Baldacci?" And I said, "I don't know." Do you like his books? Because, if you don't, I can easily be John Grisham. He said, "Oh, no, I love his books. It's great stuff." And I said, "I'm him." He said, "Well, that's a relief." And I said, "Well, why is that a relief?" He said, "Well, I'm walking by, and I see you, and I know you, but I don't know why I know you." And it finally dawned on me that you're either a guy that I've read or a guy I've arrested. I said, "No, I'm a guy you read." My wife and I were in Richmond, Virginia, which is my hometown. I no longer live there, but we go back frequently because I have family there. And we were sitting in a restaurant, like a booth, and I'm sitting here, my wife's sitting over there, and every time I look up, I notice this woman, across the restaurant, she's staring at me. And every time I look up and look at her, she looks away. And it's happened to me before, and I told my wife, you give her 5 minutes, she's coming over here. So 3 minutes later, here she comes. And she comes over, and she sort of leans down, and she said, "You're who I think you are, aren't you?" Think about that. That's a tough question to answer, actually. I said, "Well, do you like to read fiction?" She smiled. "Yes." I said, "Well, I'm him." So she turns and she yells across the restaurant to her husband, "I told you it was Grisham." And so my wife, blows Coke out of her nose. And she said very politely, I might add, she said, "Right genre, wrong author." So the woman looked mortified. She really did. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you Baldacci?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." So she turned and yelled over to her husband, "Jim, I was wrong. It's the Italian." Now, sometimes research can get you into very awkward situations. I was on the Amtrak Acela train, which is the East Coast bullet train that goes from Washington to New York and then on to Boston. And I was sitting in one of the cars, and I was sharing a table with two guys that I didn't know. They were sitting over there, and I was sitting over here. And they had suits on, and they had laptops and cell phones and BlackBerries and miniature satellite towers. It was cool watching these guys. I mean, it was like American capitalism at its finest. And I was talking on my cell phone, and I had called a friend of mine who's a medical examiner in the Bronx in New York, who's sort of a recognized expert on a subject matter that I needed to research for purposes of writing the novel called Split Second. And all I wanted to do was set up an interview with her when I got to New York face-to-face, which is how I like to do my interviews. But unfortunately, she told me she was leaving to go overseas on special assignment in about 3 hours, even before I got to New York, and she'd be gone for about 3 weeks. So either I could do it now, or I'd have to wait until she got back. Well, I had a very tight writing schedule, so I really couldn't wait for her to get back. I said, I don't usually like to do it over the phone, but if this is the only way we can do it, let's just hit it. So I had my question. I said, "Okay, Doc, this is basically how I want to murder the guy." Well, yes, in hindsight, it does look pretty stupid, but, you know. And I laid out my very sophisticated and detailed poisoning technique. And I said, look, Doc, I've got to make sure that when the police investigate this homicide, they won't even know I've killed him. They won't? Great. I said, as you know, there's going to be a postmortem done on the body, an autopsy. I need to make sure that I'll be able to fool the medical examiner so they won't know that I've killed this person. They won't? Good again. You know, my friend medical examiner actually went on to say that, you know, David, I've often thought about murdering people. You know, good public servant that she is. And she said, if I were going to do it, I'd do it just the way you described, because it really is a perfect crime. It's like, hey, you know, that's great coming from someone like you. I asked her a few more questions, and I ended by saying, I got to tell you, Doc, if I ever need to murder anybody else, I'm going to call you. So I clicked off, I finished writing my notes, and I looked up. This guy over here had spilled his coffee from his neck to his belt. He was like a massive brown stain. It was not pretty at all. The guy right across from me was saying nothing. He was just looking at me like this. And then over his shoulder, I see the Amtrak police coming. I didn't make it to New York that day. I was what is called detained. Now, it's Split Second, which is the novel that I wrote based on this research. There's an acknowledgement section, just as there is in all of my books. It's at the back of the book. The last acknowledgement in Split Second, if you've got it or you want to get it and read it, it goes something like this. To any and all passengers on the Amtrak Acela train who might have overheard me discussing with various experts poisoning techniques for purposes of researching and writing the novel, and were probably scared out of their wits at my seemingly diabolical intent, I apologize. And I thought it was really fair of the judge to let me do it that way. Don't let anybody tell you there's no justice in this country. There is. Most of my novels have been thrillers. 2 of them were not. The Wish You Well, which is the same name that we have for our family foundation that I'll talk about in just a minute, was based in 1940 in Southwest Virginia, a little mountaintop there. A lot of reviewers called it sort of a To Kill a Mockingbird sort of story. And it's taught in schools and middle, high school, and colleges across the country. I think it's changed a lot of people's lives in many ways. It was such a joy to write that novel. I first crafted it as a screenplay for a feature film, and I had a director named Ivan Reitman who's done these huge comedies like Ghostbusters and Stripes, and he called me up from California one day after reading the script, and he was like weeping. He said, this story is so beautiful, I want to film it. And I went out to California, and we worked on this project, but a screenplay is only 120 very tightly controlled pages, and the story I wanted to tell in Wish You Well would have taken a lot more space than that. So I spent another year of my life turning Wish You Well into a novel, the novel that is today, and I really think that was the true format for it. It may one day become a movie, but I think the best place for it, for now at least, is in a novel. I've written The Christmas Train. It's sort of a screwball romantic comedy about some people going across the United States by train over the holidays. And I did that solely by happenstance. I was giving a speech before the California State Bar in Anaheim, and I was finishing another novel. I just wanted 3 days by myself, no interruptions to get this book done. Normally I would fly out to California and fly back, but I took 2 trains, the Capital Limited and the Southwest Chief, all the way across the United States. It's almost 3 days, and I thought, I'll finish the book, and I did. But on a train, people love to talk to you. And you get up and you have your meals and you go to the observation car. It's not like a plane where if you like glance at somebody, they get you in a headlock. You know, or try to stuff the $6 bag of pretzels down your throat so you'll shut up. On a train, they love to talk and they love to tell stories. I mean, it's all lies completely, you know, but it's great stuff. So I got to California and I had about 50 pages of notes. I flew home and spent the next year of my life turning that into a novel, which was a lot of fun to write. Now, the Wish You Well Foundation, my wife and I founded it about 4 years ago. I've traveled the length and breadth of this country, and I can tell you, I'm sure you already know, through the efforts of literacy organizations here in Fort Wayne and through the efforts of the United Way, that we have a big problem with literacy in the United States, a big problem. We are very quickly becoming a nation where there are more people who can't read than there are people who can read. There are 300 million people in the United States. There are 200 million adults. 100 million adults read at the two lowest levels of literacy. Half the adult population is functionally illiterate. That's a staggering statistic. Staggering. Now, they graded each part of the country, and you would think, okay, in the very poor areas, maybe like the Deep South, that don't have a lot of tax revenue, a lot of tax base to have good schools. Well, the Deep South did score the worst, but they were tied. They were tied by the Northeast United States, which is home to 10 of the biggest metropolitan areas in the United States. You'll be glad to know the Midwest actually scored the highest in its literacy capabilities. But we founded the Wish You Well Foundation to sort of, in our own small way, combat that, headlong dive into illiteracy. We funded programs in about 30 states and counting. We fund kids programs, teens programs, prisoner peer programs, senior citizen literacy, adult literacy of all kinds. And we get about 3,000 applications a year. We have a board of directors and a full-time executive director, and we have 4 cycles a year where we go through all the applications and fund as many programs as we possibly can, because it is vitally important. If you think about it, some people think, okay, reading is important. I want people to enjoy to be able to read so they can lay on the beach and read the latest blockbuster. That's fine, but it's not more important than that. Then you get people who sort of get it a little bit more, and they understand, well, you need to reach your full potential. You need to be able to read to get a good job, and that's how you are going to be able to exist and have a better life for you and your family, and that's also true. But you have to take it one step further. Literacy is the core foundation of what makes us a democracy. If you have an illiterate nation, you cannot have a democracy. It's impossible. No country on earth has ever done it, and I don't want to bet that we can. If you look at the 3 greatest rights we have as Americans, they're all tied to words: free speech, free press, exercise of religious freedom. You take away any 2 of those, we're a dictatorship. We're no longer a democracy. If you think the margin of error is really high, it's not. It's a very narrow margin of error. I don't want to wake up one day in this country and realize that there are more people who can't read than can read, because I know it will change the entire dynamic of what this country represents. So the programs you have here in Fort Wayne are fabulous. It is a staggering problem, though. It's beyond a crisis. It's an epidemic across the country, and it's only getting bigger and bigger every day. And because of the economic crisis, governments have even fewer dollars to throw at this problem. I remember years ago asking an educator at a symposium about literacy that if you have 100 million adults who read at the 2 lowest levels of literacy, and the federal government only spends on average $5 a year per person on that, why does that make sense? Why don't they spend more money on adult literacy efforts? And the educator sort of looked at me like I was a simpleton, and she said, think about it. If the government acknowledges there's a problem with adult illiteracy in the United States, they also have to acknowledge there's a big problem with the K-12 program in this country, and they're never going to do that. So most of the efforts for adult literacy come through private foundations like Wish You Well and others. We've done as much as we possibly can do, and we're going to continue to do it every day to keep fighting the good fight to try to turn this around. And there are so many great programs out there, many of them here. I've talked to a lot of people in Fort Wayne earlier today who have a lot of programs that I think the Wish You Well Foundation will be very proud to sponsor. They're going to send us applications, and so I think a lot of our funds are also going to come to Indiana and help turn the situation around. Thank you. The other program that we run through the Wish You Well Foundation is called Feeding Body and Mind. Now, I've also visited lots of different areas in this country, from the exurbs to suburbs to inner city to rural areas. And needs are great across the country, and with the economy not really being really good right now, charities are getting left and right. Education systems are having their budget slashed, and there are a lot of problems and diminishing dollars to go around. The Feeding Body and Mind program is very simple. We came up with it about 2.5 years ago, and we've been going full force with it ever since. The organization that runs the nation's food banks, they used to be called America's Second Harvest. They're based in Chicago, Illinois. They've now changed their name to Feeding America. They run all the 200-plus food banks across the country where people go in seeking food assistance. It's a great program and a vital program when you consider about 40 million Americans would go hungry every day but for food assistance from the local area food banks. It's a staggering number when you think we really are the most prosperous country in the world, and yet we have 40 million people who go hungry every day but for food assistance. With the Feeding Body and Mind program, when I'm out on book tour like I am now, I have these big collection boxes, and people bring new and gently used books, and they fill the box up, and then as soon as it's full, we send them a prepaid, pre-addressed shipping label, UPS or FedEx. They put it on the box, and the FedEx comes and picks it up and takes it to the local area food bank. If I did a collection here in Fort Wayne, it would stay in the Indiana, Fort Wayne area at the local food bank. If I'm in New Mexico, there, California, the same, so it stays locally based. I've got a lot of author friends of mine who are signed on to do this same thing on their book tours. Bookstores around the country are coming on board, public libraries, publishers. You wouldn't believe how many tens of millions of books are destroyed or thrown away every year by people. What we want to do is sort of balance this out. We want to take the books from people who have too many and have no use for them or room for them anymore, and put them in the hands of people who have no books at all and who desperately need them. We found, obviously, you need food to survive, but food alone never gets you out of that cycle of poverty. People most often are impoverished and can't be self-sustaining because they have low job skills, and they have low job skills because they have low literacy skills. It goes hand in hand. It's the same demographic. It's the same audience. What we want to do is put books in their lives, put literacy in their lives. If you have a book in the house, you're much more likely to seek assistance to help you read that book. The catalyst for most people to go out as adults to learn how to read is when one thing happens in their house, is when their child for the first time pulls a book off the shelf, holds it up to mom or dad, and says, "Will you read this to me?" And if mom or dad can't read that book to them, mom and dad are far more likely to go out to many of the private tutoring organizations around the country to learn how to read so they can read that book to their child. If there's no book in that house, that catalyst is never going to happen. I've never seen a bad thing come out of having a book in a house, and that's what we want to do with this program. Now, I'll close with a couple of stories. The first story is to illustrate this point. Words really can change your life. Maybe it's happened to you. Here's how it sort of happened to me. I was on a book tour about 4 years ago. I had done a coast-to-coast, 30-city book tour. I was at my last event in Virginia, actually very close to my house. It was right before the holidays, and quite frankly, I just wanted to finish this event and go home and spend the holidays with my family because I'd been gone on the road for a long time. Now, there are a lot of guys in line buying last-minute Christmas presents. I mean, it was dominated by men. Wow. Of course, the women were all prepared. They'd already done everything, so the guys had gone out to get their book signed. So there are a lot of people in line. I'm signing as fast as I can sign until there are only 3 people left in line. There's a guy who's got a bunch of my books, and there are 2 women probably in their 20s, and they're behind him, and the women are together, and they have one of my books. Now, while I'm signing the gentleman's books, I'm committing the curse of the writer. I'm eavesdropping on the women. Because quite frankly, writers are shameless about eavesdropping. We just are. I can't help myself. It's amazing what I've heard here tonight. Wow, But you can find out about it in the next book. Anyway. But in my defense, these women were having a very interesting conversation. The woman holding the book whispers to her friend, so she thinks I can't hear, and she says, "That guy in front of us has a lot of books. Maybe I can use that as an excuse to get out of here." I don't really like to hear that at my book signings, but you never know. Now, her friend's response was even more cryptic and even more unsettling to me. Her friend whispered back and said, "You can't leave without getting that book signed. It's a matter of life and death." All right, well, I'm totally freaked out by now. The guy leaves, and it's just me and these 2 women. And they come up. She puts the book down in front of me, and she leans in close and said, "Mr. Baldacci, have I got a very special request for you?" I said, "I'm sure you do." She said, "My name is Amy, and the person I want you to write the book to, his name is Tom." And she went on to tell me that Tom had read all my books, and he'd heard me speak, and he really valued my opinion. And if I wrote what she wanted me to write in that book, and Tom opened it on Christmas morning and read it, it would change both of their lives forever. Now, Amy went on to tell me that Tom had asked her to marry him 3 times. She didn't tell me what she told Tom on those 3 occasions, only that the poor guy had gone to the well thrice with Amy. So here's what Amy wanted me to write. To Tom, Amy loves you with all of her heart. Amy would love to share her life with yours. Amy accepts your proposal of marriage. And then dear sweet Amy looked at me and added the immortal words, and whatever else you want to write. Feel free to try to top that tonight. So she said, will you do it? It's sort of important. I said, Amy, I can see it's important. And I thought about it, and finally I said, you know what, Amy? If you have the courage to come up to a complete stranger and ask him to do something so significant in your life, then the complete stranger should have the courage to do it. And I did. I wrote everything she asked me to write. And then something really weird happened. It was like the holiday spirit seized me somehow, because I kept going. I wrote down one page, I turned the page, I wrote down another page. I wrote 3 pages on this woman. Bringing to bear all my gifts as a storyteller, as a wordsmith. And by the time I had finished, she was no longer Amy, just a mortal woman. She was Saint Amy. She was beautiful. It was just beautiful. Some of the best stuff I've ever written, by the way. And she read it, and she was laughing. She started crying. She hugged me. She goes, oh, my God, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And then she's walking off. I remember calling after her, and I said, Amy, you tell Tom, he's a hell of a lucky guy. And then Amy, a woman I didn't even know, disappeared from my life. Now, as I'm packing up to go home, something struck me about what I really had just done. And I started to pray. I said, God, can you let this marriage work out? Because look at it, if Amy turns out to be not nearly as wonderful as I wrote that she was in those 3 pages, and she instead, ruins that man's life, Tom is coming for me. And ever since that book signing, and I've done hundreds of book signings since, a little piece of me is always looking for Tom. I really hope that guy is happy. I just really do. Now, the next story illustrates this point. A book can change your life as well. A book really can change your life. It changed my life, and this is how that happened. When I worked in Washington, D.C. as a lawyer, for most of my career, I worked as a trial lawyer. And it was a small firm. I knew the other lawyers. It was very collegial. I knew all the other clients. We really felt like we were building something together. It was a nice atmosphere. My last year in practice, my little firm was absorbed by a multinational firm. And instead of attorney David Baldacci, I became attorney 587. And at this firm, I was told that I was going to work with a senior partner who was described to me as the most anal lawyer in America. I know it might surprise you that lawyers sometimes can be a little anal about things, but apparently they have a competition every year, and this guy kept winning. So we were doing this acquisition where a client of ours was purchasing another company. And I remember this lawyer was so particular about things. He never wrote with pen. He never used a computer. He only wrote in pencil. And he had a jar of pencils on his desk. And if the points were really sharp, they were pointing up. If they were a little dull, he would flip them over so the eraser end was showing. And that was a cue for his long-suffering secretary, of which he went through many, to race in and sharpen his pencils. So this was the guy I was going to work with. So he asked me to call the attorney on the other side of this acquisition and ask him about 3 facts. He wanted to know if these 3 facts were true or not. So I called the guy up on the phone and I asked him, is this true, is this true? And I got the answers and I wrote it down all in a memo, which is how you communicated these huge firms, and I sent it to the senior partner. And about 10 minutes later he called me and he said, did you write this memo? And he read it to me, and I said, yeah, I wrote it. He said, come to my office immediately. So I walked down to his big corner office. We walked in. he closed the door, he sat down, he handed me the piece of paper, and he said, "Read that to me." I said, "Well, I called attorney so-and-so on the phone, and I received verbal representations that the following 3 facts were true or not. I listed the facts, and in parentheticals, I gave the status of each fact, and that was pretty much it." So the senior partner looked at me, and he said, "You called him on the phone?" I said, "Yeah." "You received a verbal representation?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, tell me, do you know the difference between oral and verbal?" I just looked at him for like the longest time. And finally I said, "You know what? Quite frankly, not my whole life have I had to think about that. But if I thought about it, I guess oral would only encompass spoken language, technically, whereas verbal could encompass spoken language or the sounds that living things can make, like the grunt of a monkey." He said, "Exactly. You didn't receive a verbal representation. You received an oral representation. I don't tolerate imprecision in my attorneys. Don't ever let that happen again." So anyway, while the guy's talking to me, the theme song from The Twilight Zone is flashing through my head for some reason. And after he finished his little tirade, I just looked at him, and he's a senior partner, I wasn't, and I said, "You know what, I'm really sorry. I went to the University of Virginia, which is a really top law school. I must have missed the oral-verbal class, but I can guarantee you that now that I know, it'll never happen to this attorney again, I can assure you." And I thought, that was it. And I walked out of his office, and, I knew he was kind of a whack job, but that's okay. It happens. Everybody has a bad day. That was my day to have a bad day. And I went back to my office, and I thought, okay, that's over. We'll just move forward. Well, about 2 hours later, in the inter-office mail, I got 2 items from this gentleman. One was a page from a book. I have no idea where he found the book, but he found it. And he'd had it blown up to poster board size. And it said, "How to tell the difference between oral and verbal." And there were 6 helpful bullet points so that morons like myself would never make that mistake again. And the second item he sent me was a book, and the title of the book was How to Write Well. Now, I don't consider myself overly sensitive, but I thought it was a bit much for the oral-verbal snafu thingy to have this happen. And I was embarrassed, too, because, as you know, everybody knew he had sent me these items. The mail office talks, and all the lawyers were talking, and I'm sure they thought I was some fool, and it was just embarrassing. Well, the very next day, my first novel, Absolute Power, sold for the most money ever paid for a first novel in the history of American publishing. It was a good day for me. And you have to understand, too, all those years I was writing, by the time I sold Absolute Power, I had been writing for almost 16 years, with not a whole lot to show for it. Nobody knew I was writing all those years other than my wife, my mom and my dad, and my brother and my sister. My in-laws didn't know. None of my close friends knew. My aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins, nobody I'd ever practiced law with knew that I was writing all those years, because it was a very private thing for me. I didn't have anything really to tell them. So what? Who cares? It's not like CNN Newsbreak, Baldacci's writing. What is a Baldacci? I don't know. So we had to undertake the task of going around to all of our friends and letting them know this had happened to us, and it was a very surreal experience, because half our friends thought we were getting the big news my wife and I had to share was either were we getting divorced or having another baby. And I said, well, we are having another baby, but I'm actually the one delivering this time, and it's called a book. And I also had to call my father-in-law, who at that time lived in the Midwest, and is a big, gruff guy. And, I called him up and I said, all these years I've been married to your daughter, I have to admit now that I've been leading a secret double life. Don't ever tell anybody that from the Midwest. I mean, it was just, to this day, he's really nervous being in the same room with me. And it was a big enough deal that we knew the newspaper was probably going to pick this up. But anyway, I I sort of made a fib at my firm. I went to New York. Time Warner, which bought the rights to the book, threw this big party for me, and foreign rights were sold in like 15 countries in a matter of hours. The film rights were sold. It was like people I didn't even know were throwing checks at me as fast as they could. I wish that on everybody in this auditorium at least once in your life. I really do. And my idea was to go back to Washington the next day and slowly explain to people at my new firm that I've been writing all these years. I'd sent this book out, my first big break, and that's what it was going to be. But my plans went awry because while I was in New York, my agent put a copy of a newspaper article under me, and it was the whole story, a little picture drawing of me and the whole story about my backstory, writing all those years, the big sale to Time Warner, the film rights and all that. And I said, where is this running? And he said, well, it's in today's Wall Street Journal. Now, as far as I know, every law firm in the world, I think, subscribes to the Wall Street Journal, at least mine did. So I called my secretary immediately in D.C., and I said, by any chance, has anyone at the firm stumbled across this obscure article about me? And she said, oh, my God, David, the whole firm is shut down. All 11 offices. And they're all out in the hallway, and they're all reading the story, and they're all going, who the hell is Attorney 587? It must have been some book he wrote. So I got back to D.C. the next day, and I was slowly explaining to people, what had happened. And I still worked at the firm and still worked there for a while afterwards. And I went back to my desk, and I sat down, and I saw that book, How to Write Well. This is not an apocryphal story. This really happened. And I remember staring at this book for an hour. And finally I said, you know what, David? You will never have another chance like this in your whole life. So I picked the book up, and I marched down to the senior partner's office. I went in. He was behind his desk. He was looking kind of grumpy. I think he had read the Wall Street Journal article and knew I wasn't going to be sharpening his pencils much longer. With as much sincerity as I could muster, I held the book up and I said, I just wanted you to know how much this book has changed my life. Thank you. As a little addendum, I go down to the same law firm every year in Washington. I go into this huge conference room where they have stacked books of mine all the way from floor to ceiling. I spend the whole day down there signing books for lawyers and clients and friends of the firm. And let me tell you, lawyers can get a little verbose in their inscription requests. And every year, this same senior partner comes in with his books for me to sign, and he always brings somebody with him, introduces me, and sort of stands off, and I see him out of the corner of my eye, and I look at him, and he's talking to the friend, and he always says the same thing. He said, sort of sheepishly, he says, I got to tell you, David's kind of doing what he's doing because of me. Now, before we have the question and answer, I have been asked to read this, and I certainly am very honored to do so. Thank you for joining me tonight. Before you go, I'd like to remind you to fill out the United Way volunteer card you received when you came in. I really do encourage you to get involved in Learn United or any other local literacy effort, and there are a lot of them, and many of them do fantastic work. And it's important we help all our children learn to read so they can not only experience the joy of reading, but so they can take the gift of reading and use it to build happy, healthy, and productive lives. Now, I'd love to take some questions if you have them. Yes.
I'm one of these unfortunate people who are slowly decreasing. I can't go on vacation without picking up a newspaper. We were in Williamsburg, Virginia in late August on vacation, and there was this thing about the police chief. I would like to paraphrase Paul Harvey and hear the end of the story to find out, did they take his degree away or what happened there?
This was a question of my alma mater in Richmond. The police chief in Richmond had taken, I'm on the board of visitors at this college, and the police chief had taken 6 credit hours at the college and gotten his degree. He had 120-odd degrees from other colleges, so they gave him the degree. He needed it to be able to become the police chief in Charlotte. They have not rescinded the degree yet. I wrote a letter about that to the board of visitors. It was subsequently leaked to the press, even though I didn't want it to be. There were 16 Board of Visitors members at a conference, and the vote was 15-1. I was the one on the other side who thought that they were sort of scapegoating a lot of people, and it needed to be more reasoned and measured response to this. But they have not rescinded the degree. The last I heard, he might voluntarily give it up. But we'll have to wait and see. But the university will move forward, and that shows. I wouldn't have been able to make such an inspired defense if I were not a reader and a writer. And so it was just one of those things that happens in academia from time to time.
There's one down front.
Yeah, just go ahead. Yeah.
When you start a story, do you have a vision on how it's going to end? And as you're writing a book, do you ever go down a tangent and change it?
Do I know when I first started writing the novel how it's going to end, whatever's going to be in it? I start down one path, and all of a sudden I go down another path. I rarely know the ending of a book when I first start writing it. I may not know the ending until I'm halfway through, three-quarters of the way through. I have a lot of friends who are writers, and some of my friends have outlines that are longer than their novels, which is really weird to me. But I think about it a lot. I use little miniature outlines, but I'm flexible and adaptable. That's part of the creative process. You're supposed to be spontaneous. And it takes me about 100 pages before I get to even know my characters well enough. And I've written books where I thought one set of characters was going to deliver most of the narrative, and all of a sudden I've got another character on the periphery going, hey, what about me? I'm far more interesting than that guy. And I've been taking medication for the voices in my head. And, I think that too soon shall pass. But I like to be a little more spontaneous, and I like to let the story sort of take me where it's supposed to go, as opposed to looking at a very rigid outline, and this tells me what I'm supposed to write about today. I think that's a little bit of the cheap way out. It's easy to write an outline, 1, subsection 1, A, B. Main character does something cool today. Anybody can write that line. Then you have to think of what the cool thing the main character does. So I think some writers do these amazing outlines so they can procrastinate on actually writing the book, which is actually the hard part. I don't count words. I don't do 2,000 words a day or 10,000 words a day. I've never understood that artificial goal. I sort of chide some of my writer friends to do it. I said, the only reason you count words is so that you can get to 2,000 and then chuck it and go play golf, is what you really wanted to do today anyway. And they're like, well, yeah. So for me, some days I write no words. Some days I write 10,000 words, and then I write 500 words. It's not the quantity of the words, it's the quality of the words that are supposed to matter in the story. So I'm very flexible on that. No day is a typical day for me. My life is typical only for being atypical.
Do we have any questions in the upper tier?
Having read just about all of your books, and they're wonderful, what is the fact versus fiction of the corruptness of the United States government? I mean, we've got CIA, we've got the Secret Service, the FBI. Everybody's corrupt. How much of that is fact? How much of that is fiction?
Well, everybody heard the question, I assume. I can only give you my enlightened opinion on that. I have a lot of friends in a lot of different agencies, law enforcement, intelligence, defense, and I really respect the people in the trenches who actually do the work day in and day out, risk their lives to keep us safe, who do the nitty-gritty stuff that needs to be done to keep our nation protected, to keep our nation moving forward. And they come from all walks of life, and they've joined those ranks for all sorts of reasons. But I found, at least in my experience talking with them, they sort of have a commonality of wanting to serve the public. That's one of the main reasons they get into what they do. A lot of these people have specialized skills. They could go into the private sector and do far better financially, but they want to serve their country. With that said, my major problem, and I think in a USA Today interview, somebody asked me on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being cynical, really cynical, and 1 being not cynical at all, what's your level of cynicism, vis-a-vis the government? And I said between an 8.7 and a 9.4. I said, not that I've given it a lot of thought, but that's kind of the sweet spot I'm talking about. I have a problem, I think, mostly with the leadership, oftentimes the political leadership of putting people in the trenches in the wrong position, putting them in positions where they're going to fail no matter what they do, and taking the country in some wrong-headed directions from time to time. You know, unfortunately, we've seen it in this last election cycle. Regardless of which party you were for or whether you like the outcome or not, it seems like our government is set up now to ensure, and everybody keeps talking about the fact that the Founding Fathers put in these checks and balances so that change would not happen fast. But it seems like with our two-party system, whoever's in power and whoever's out of power, the side out of power wants to do whatever it can to make sure the party in power can do nothing at all, in the hopes that they will be returned to power at some point. But the people who are really hurt by that are us, as citizens, when nothing really changes anymore. And where you have two parties who are so opposed on not wanting the other side to be able to be successful, because then that will reflect better on them and not so better on that party. And that's a divide, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. That thing just goes on no matter who's in power. And I think the issues we have today as a country, and this is far more than you ever wanted to know when you asked that question. I realize that. You know, I really do. But, you know, the point is that for us to move forward as a country, we really do need to get over that hump at some point. And I think the problems we have facing us today, I mean, there are all age groups here, from young to older. And we've all seen issues and problems. And, we've had Great Depressions. We've had world wars. Now we have big issues sort of coming together at the same time. And it's going to be a very delicate sort of thing that, I'm sure we'll come out the other end. I think we're all sort of wondering what that other end will look like and when it's going to come. So I think this is the time, where the government really does need to pull together. And I know we've heard it many times before, to step up and change things, and we'll see if it actually happens. But I do think it really does need to happen at this point. And then, I'll drop my cynicism level down to like a 6.9, 7.4, maybe 7.75. I'm not sure yet, but I'd like to get it down closer to 6 anyway.
Can we take one more question?
Okay.
My name's Tom.
Man, you look great. You look great. Where are the kids?
But my wife's name is not Amy. I appreciate your comment on free press, free speech, free religion, and how that we lose one, we have a dictatorship. My question is, with the fairness doctrine being applied to speech, would you ever envision it being applied to freedom of religion or to press, or even by extension, books?
I'm a person who sees no good ever coming out of censorship or restrictions of any kind. Whether you agree with people's issues and positions or not, I was taught as a lawyer the slippery slope is indeed slippery. And I don't like the fact that, Nazis or skinheads can march down the street, or members who still, for some reason, are members of the KKK can congregate and march. But I understand the principles behind which it's important for them to be able to do so in the United States of America, because that's what keeps our nation exactly what it is. Once you start chipping away at those types of rights and said, well, they still have the right, but we're just going to pull it back just a little bit. Human nature is to keep pulling it back a little bit more, a little bit more, and a little bit more. There have been many books written about that. 1984 by George Orwell is probably the most prominent among them. So I live in a country that has the greatest freedoms. I don't like some groups, but that's my personal position. Would I ever say that we should censor them and restrict their rights? No, because I know that one day, if you do that to them, then all of a sudden you're doing the same thing to other groups that maybe I do agree with and maybe should have, great freedoms. It's either all or nothing in our country. And let me end by this. To let you know how important libraries and books and reading are to a free and democratic society, I was reading a magazine article a few years ago, and it was talking about the worst dictators in history. What they do first when they take over a country. They have like a little checklist. Who knew? It's like when we go to the grocery store, we got a checklist. When you got dictators taking over, they whip out the checklist. They can, okay, let me see what Well, with all due deference to Mr. Shakespeare, the first thing dictators do is not kill all the lawyers. I'm really happy for that, actually. It's we can be fun at parties. What they do is they close and shutter all the libraries whenever they take over a country. That is all you will ever need to know about the importance of books, reading, and libraries in a culture that is free, open, and democratic. Thank you very much.